Good afternoon, members of Parliament, support staff, visitors, radio listeners, TV viewers, those following via social media, and members of the media. Welcome to this meeting of the Ad Hoc Committee Electoral Reform number 3 of today, Thursday, April 19th, 2023. I would like to give a special welcome to Mr. Julio Romney, our guest here today. We have established a quorum of 7 members. Please stand for a moment of silence. I have received notice of absence from the following members: MP William Marlin, MP George Pontiflet, MP Akeem Arundel, MP Brown Bill, MP Bryson, and MP Emmanuel. Are there any notifications? MP Westcott Williams.
Thank you, Madam Chair Lady. Madam Chair Lady, a good afternoon to you. Good afternoon to my colleagues. A good afternoon to our invited guest, Mr. Julio Romney. A good afternoon to all tuned in to this meeting. Madam Chair Lady, today this meeting has been called to discuss and deliberate with Mr. Romney on a proposal that he has, a position paper rather, that he has presented Parliament with since, I believe, early March. And I recall having brought up this matter in a meeting before, and this matter being that it, in my opinion, would behoove this committee to establish a parameter of what it is we want to handle and what it is we want to do as a committee. For the longest of time, there is a proposal that has circulated in this committee regarding a terms of reference for areas that this committee in the past determined that we should look at as part of our electoral reform agenda. We hear nothing about that proposal. In addition to that, we have had discussions with the Prime Minister because, Madam Chair Lady, for those of us who recall, this committee, as I mentioned before, had an outline of the changes that we would like to see falling under the mantra of electoral reform. They were identified, a draft terms of reference was developed. In addition to that, this committee, some time ago, decided that as much as possible, we would have synchronized the efforts of this committee with those of the government that has also identified electoral reform as a priority area. Informal discussions have taken place. Based on questions asked, we have received, for example, from government, some results of a survey conducted by government. We have done nothing with that information coming from government. And so today we have Mr. Romney here. We're going to hear from him. He has written papers on several matters that could be part of electoral reform. And my point is that we don't have a direction. We don't have a direction as committee in terms of electoral reform. Several members of Parliament, including myself, have made proposals to government with respect to electoral reform. We in this committee have not discussed those. And now today we're going to hear a presentation from Mr. Romney, and I just want to emphasize the point that I believe we need to establish a direction and the areas of priority for this committee as electoral reform and pick back up the ball with the different issues that we have identified. So I look forward to hearing on this topic from Mr. Romney, but I think as committee, we need to decide where we want to go, and that it not becomes just grabbing a topic here, a topic there, without a clear direction in terms of electoral reform and what we would like to see addressed. I thank you, Madam Chair Lady, for the opportunity to express my views as far as this matter is concerned.
Thank you, MP Westcott Williams. Does anyone else wish to have the floor? I too agree with you, MP Westcott Williams, that it is our task as the committee to work on whatever has been brought forward before and come together to do such. So thank you for your comments. I now give the floor to Mr. Romney. You have the floor.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, ad hoc committee members, persons in the Tribune, all persons viewing or listening by other means. Madam Chair, I'd like to thank you for expeditiously honoring my request for the opportunity to testify before this esteemed ad hoc electoral reform committee. Testifying with respect to the need for electoral reform and addressing the political conundrums in St. Martin. A request that has been motivated in part by an unknown citizen. Specifically, several weeks ago at a political event, I was approached by a gentleman. In a calm but stern voice, he said to me, "I am mad with you." Taken back, as I had no idea who this good gentleman was, I replied to him, "Why are you mad with me?" Staring at me, he continued in the stern tone of voice to say, "With your level of education and knowledge, you should be representing us in Parliament and government. You should be heading a revolution to bring about sanity to our government." This conversation continued for several minutes before we were interrupted by another person. Fast forward, as I was leaving the good gentleman from a distance yelled out to me, "Soldier, soldier," while looking at me fiercely. I acknowledged his gesture by nodding my head and continued my exit. Therefore, I have requested an unsolicited testifying here today. Responding to this political conundrum, motivated by practices that are inconsistent with our election system, the Honorable Prime Minister has embarked on a protracted odyssey to ascertain certain possible changes that could be made to the election system that will set the stage for a more stable political environment for governments to come. And equally, I must say, the establishment of this ad hoc committee for electoral reform by Parliament, with the task of taking an inventory of all election laws and policies that provide recommendations on forming the election system, to include reforms to the electoral constituency model, or to include reforms to the electoral constituency model, election district borders, ballot design, voting equipment, and scrutinizing election monitoring by candidates and political parties. Madam Chair, at this point, please allow me to regress and make it abundantly clear to each member of this committee here and others that my testimony today is not as an advocate or to advocate for or against any aspect of electoral reform, but as a compassionate, patriotic St. Martin social scientist, out of a sense of moral responsibility, availing my gained knowledge and experiences to government structure, election systems design, in a bid that will best afford the committee to carry out its electoral reform task. Madam Chair, education knowledge that includes a bachelor's degree with double major in economics and political science, a master's in public administration, public policy and formulation, and at a doctoral level, comparative government and politics and international relations. Thereto, I have authored several books, white papers, and delivered concept presentations. Selected works related to this subject matter includes the author of the notorious FISA concept, accepted by the Executive Council of St. Martin as the preferred constitutional order within the kingdom. If I recall, this was done somewhere in the 1990, something to that effect. I have also represented St. Martin on a constitution for the restructuring of the Netherlands Antilles and exclusively wrote a section on nation building in the committee's Make It Work report. Wrote and submit a draft ordinance to abate the ship jumping phenomenon. Published a book detailing the constitutional framework of St. Martin post-1010 titled St. Martin, Our Constituent State Constitutional Framework. And most recently, moderated a public discussion on understanding St. Martin's statutory order within the Kingdom of the Netherlands, its advantages, disadvantages, and a sustainable way forward. Madam Chair, based on the record number of times government has fallen in the past 12 years and unable to realize the true potential of well-functioning democracy, it has become crystal clear that for the most part, St. Martin political conundrum pertains to our electoral system. Madam Chair, the election system from appreciative of systems adhering, I guess that's the wrong system. Okay, that's wrong there. Madam Chair, in defining election system, our constitutional values and guidelines, St. Martin electoral system is based on a system of proportional representation, an elected system designed to appropriate the ideal of proportionality in converting citizens' vote into legislative seats. This is further expounded in the explanatory memorandum of the Constitution of St. Martin, indicating that these legislative seats are determined based on the division of total number of votes cast in the entire constituent state by the number of available seats in Parliament. In other words, a party that wins 10% of the votes in an election will hold 10% of the seats in Parliament. Madam Chair, here lies the crux of St. Martin political conundrum. Party representatives in Parliament circumventing the election system, resulting in instability and stagnation in government. In that regard, over the years, members of Parliament have been indiscriminately declaring themselves as independent from their respective elected political party, thereafter aligning with a different political party or party, thus causing the duly elected government to fall and calling of new elections. While this declaring as an independent member of Parliament continues today, said declared independent members of Parliament are now shying away from aligning with a different political party and/or parties and opting to sit in Parliament as an independent new faction, thus fostering minority support in Parliament and positioning themselves as the balance of power in Parliament. A development that is inconsistent with democratic elected representatives and the scheme of the election system, thus warrant the need or indicating for electoral reform in that particular area. Nonetheless, there are those that believe otherwise and contend that they have won the seat and justifiably can declare themselves as an independent member of Parliament. Madam Chair, they ought to be referred to Article 47 of the Constitution, Section 2 of its explanatory memorandum, and which unequivocally states that the distribution of seats and membership in Parliament is based on a system list, which is political parties, not a system of persons or candidates. And every political party is assigned a number of seats in Parliament in proportion to the number of votes cast for that political party. Madam Chair, this is reflected further in Article 95 of the Election Ordinance, which plainly states that the Central Voting Bureau shall divide the sum of the voting figures of all political parties by the number of seats to be filled in Parliament. The results of the division here is referred to as the electoral quota. Thereafter, seats will be assigned to political parties as many times as the electoral quota is included in the voting figure of that party list. Article 98 further states that for the purpose of filling seats allotted to each political party, seats are assigned in order of the candidates with the highest votes on that particular party list. Madam Chair, this clearly debunks any notion that the seat belongs to the candidate or member of Parliament. In addition, if parliamentary seats were belong to the member of Parliament, said independent member of Parliament would be looking forward to defending their supposedly seat in Parliament and not in search of a political party home to contest the upcoming election, and hopefully their selected party is allotted seats in Parliament and they have garnered enough votes within the party to be assigned a seat and return to Parliament. Madam Chair, we have also heard the false narrative on the floor of Parliament that members of Parliament have a right to declare themselves as an independent members of Parliament. Madam Chair, I can stand corrected, but where in the statutory order is it explicitly or implicitly mentioned that members of Parliament have a right to declare themselves as independent members of Parliament? Madam Chair, in search of an answer to said question, as part of the ongoing white paper research with the work entitled The Evolution of the Kingdom of the Netherlands, St. Martin Perspective, I have queried the Central Voting Bureau as to the same question, based on which statutory order or orders are members of Parliament allowed to declare themselves as independent members of Parliament? Are independent members of Parliament legally permissible? Also required as to which constitutional or statutory order allows for Parliament to accept and recognize members of Parliament indiscriminately declaring themselves as independent members of Parliament, effectively superseding the statutory principle of proportional representation and voiding the ministerial regulation that has established the composition of Parliament based on electorate's votes. Madam Chair, a copy of this correspondence was sent to Parliament, to the Parliament of St. Martin and the Electoral Council, also respectfully asking for their perspective. This was sent in October of 2022. To date, no response has been received. Madam Chair, the need to address such disturbing factors is what has generated the debate for electoral reform. In response, some years ago, I drafted and submitted to Parliament a draft election ordinance amending legislation. The draft legislation sought to reform election systems by amending Article 95, 96, 97, and 98 of the election ordinance, with a purpose to ensure the sanctity and rightful democratic elected representation in Parliament and political stability on the island. In addition, to provide for a more enhanced mathematical process when allocating seats in Parliament, i.e. the D'Hondt method. At a more fundamental level, a number of other measures have been suggested for electoral reform by politicians and others, to include the removal of the black curtain from the voting booths. At the onset, this appears to be a worthy idea. As for the critics that there is no empirical evidence to support this initiative as a measure to enhance or increase the efficiency of the election system, this could be easily counteracted with available circumstantial evidence that has encouraged other jurisdictions to remove the black curtain. The notion to switch from a single constituency voting system to a multiple constituency voting system, this could prove problematic when it comes to drawing boundary lines and a level playing field and establishing a level playing field when determining the number of votes needed to get elected in one voting constituent versus the other. As for the idea of coding the ballots, this too can be problematic with respect to casting secret ballots. The coding of each individual ballot must be pinned to something. Would this something likely pass the smell test of being traced back to the person that cast the vote, notwithstanding that the coding of ballots is likely to have no effect on the conundrum of the Bulgarian train as I understand it and its intended purpose. Madam Chair, I've also heard about the whole idea of having the top 15 vote getters during elections, that these persons be elected to Parliament, or rather these persons now become the member of Parliament. That, in essence, Madam Chair, what we have here is a parliamentary system. And having all 15 persons with the top votes, in essence, you're saying, or that could very much go into the effect of saying of a one-party system, okay? And that's derived from a one-party system where you just take the 15 top persons, there would be no need for different political parties. And I think, or to my mind, that would not be the most efficient way to go, particularly because the issue is not with the number of persons. The issue is with the governing. The issue lies within Parliament. The issue lies with the members of Parliament working together. Okay? The issue lies in terms of understanding and equating our parliamentary system of government. There's also the talk about the election, whether the election of ministers. Okay? Election of ministers, it's a good idea. However, that is more of a leaning towards a presidential system of government. And the parliamentary system of government, well, currently one does not elect ministers. However, I think for St. Martin, the parliamentary system of government probably is the most efficient if, again, we follow the principles of parliamentary procedure, the principles of our election system. Because, in essence, the ministers are supposed to be not elected, but professional persons. And having that option that we will then appoint ministers opens our governmental structure, or open the government for getting the best of both worlds when it comes to professionalism, of persons being able to carry out those duties. For example, myself, as a scholar of comparative government and politics, I might have absolutely no interest in becoming a politician. My interest is in development administration of a political entity. And with this system, parliamentary system, that gives me now the opportunity to participate in the governing process. It gives me the opportunity that the members of Parliament would appoint such professional into this position. The idea of having elected members in ministry, I think, rob us from that great sense of professionalism. And when one thinks about electoral reform, one must be keenly interested in trying to change those things that would help advance the government, help stabilize government. And it just should not be something that one thinks, okay, let's do this or do that. No. It should be something that we know that would effectively assist in advancing government. And as we see it today, our issue is what? Government not remaining or rather, don't have a government that goes to the full length of term. So that should be our focus, to my mind. In conclusion, we should be mindful that the proposed measures for electoral reform are to be objectively enhance and increase the efficiency of our electoral system. I'll say it again. Whatever they are, it should be based on objectively enhancing and increasing the efficiency of the election system. Likewise, the process of electoral reform can only be successful where there is coordination among the electoral machinery, the political parties, the candidates, and the electorate. Thank you for your indulgence.
Thank you, Mr. Romney. I would like to ask if it's possible for you to share your notes with this committee in order for us to be able to have a look and also have it be a part of our consideration. when we do have a debate on the various topics that were mentioned before.
Yes, I guess I can.
Thank you.
Written for me, so excuse any typos, errors, what have you, but I can share that.
Thank you. I now give the floor to MP Westcott Williams.
Thank you once again, Madam Chair Lady. I want to deduce from your comments requesting the document from Mr. Romney that this committee, and I hope by the next meeting, will try to delineate the topics that we want to discuss and further, so to get going. So I hope with that in mind is why you asked for the document, that we can look at it and hear some of the proposals and standpoints of Mr. Romney. And on that similar note, I want to make mention of the fact that there is a overview, and I've stated this before as well, of all of the different proposals that have come to Parliament from citizens, from organizations where electoral reform is concerned. I have compiled that overview, and that is available. So throughout the years that have come to Parliament, proposals for law, proposals to make changes, et cetera, et cetera. That's a note. But then directly to Mr. Romney, and it would surprise no one that Mr. Romney and I have had many discussions on this topic, and correctly so, going back to the days of FISA, Full Internal Self-Government in Sovereign Association, was the paper at the time that we called FISA, approved by the then island government of St. Martin, to be pursued. But my question has to do, I want to come back to this issue of the association that is made between voting one's conscience, which we have freely translated that in such a fashion. However, it comes from the premise, it comes from the traditional Dutch premise of not having to go back to your people, to your group, to get a mandate to vote. That's where that particular statement in our Constitution comes from. So that members are called to vote without, in essence, feedback. So it's not, there's nowhere it's stated we must vote or we are called to vote our conscience. It says we don't have to look for any mandate to vote. That statement in our Constitution comes from a Dutch political tradition where, when at the time of their constitution, the Dutch constitution, and the voting at the time where the landowners were very prominent and wealthy persons, and then it was made clear and it was put in the constitutions that persons elected needed not to go to their backers, let me call it that, their achterban. That's where that issue comes into play. We have over the years, and it's not St. Martin, we have taken it over from the Netherlands Antilles, and they who took it over from the Netherlands, and we have then come to interpret that as voting your conscience. Now, you have made it clear, this being Mr. Romney, through you, Madam Chair Lady, how you feel about that translating into a member of parliament being able to declare his or herself independent. And I hear your position on it. No, there is nowhere where that is statutory regulated in terms of the Declaration of Independence. However, I hear you having put that question to, I think you said, to not only the main voting bureau, but also our, was it the census office, but whatever you mentioned, and you said that that correspondence was sent to Parliament. So I just wanted to have that confirmed, that your correspondence with the Electoral Council or the main voting bureau on this matter, that you have sent that to Parliament. So just let me get that confirmed, Madam Chair Lady, and then I'll continue with my thoughts.
You have the floor.
Yes, that correspondence was sent to, as an inquiry letter, to the Central Voting Bureau as the body that is basically was established to ensure proportional representation. A copy was also sent to the Electoral Council and Parliament, at the same time, requesting, not demanding or anything like that, but just a loose statement saying, I would like your perspective.
Okay. So, Madam Chair Lady, with your indulgence, if I may, haven't heard the clarification on that topic, thank you. And then my question has to do with the following. Considering that this is not a St. Martin thing, so to speak, have you put your query, your critique, have you put it outside of St. Martin and within the kingdom where this practice is also standard/common, to hear how others view it? So have you also put your position outside of St. Martin to get feedback on where you stand, because you have the same separation from factions and party that takes place throughout the Dutch kingdom? And have you requested and or received feedback from anyone else, outside, who also engages in the practice or allow the practice of independent declarations? So have you gotten any feedback from others who also, support, condone this practice, like the Netherlands or the other countries within the Dutch kingdom? Thank you, Madam Chair Lady. That's what I would like to hear a response to. Thank you.
Thank you, MP Westcott Williams. I give the floor now to MP William Marlin. You have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good afternoon to colleagues, and a special good afternoon to Mr. Romney, who over the years has been a frequent visitor to this Parliament, and people might almost mistake him with being a member of Parliament for the amount of times he's been here. Madam Chair, it would have been probably good to have had a response immediately to the question that was posed by MP Westcott Williams, as it would have probably add some more ingredients to the discussion. The discussion on electoral reform and electoral change is nothing new to those of us who have been around in the Island Council of St. Martin leading up to the different referenda that we have had. And of course, full internal self-government was one of the big issues at the time, spearheaded by the founding leader of the SPM, Mr. Vance James Jr., the late Vance James Jr., at the time that was prepared on advice on a constitutional lawyer. I forgot his name, from St. Kitts. The opposition to that on St. Martin at the time was arguing that FISA was no different to independence, because you can't have full internal self-government, what we have technically, not technically, maybe for 75%, we have full internal self-government, because on too many matters pertaining to our self-governing, we have more and more interference by the colonial government in The Hague, and Others may not like the phrase, but in the end, that is what it is. The kingdom government has their authority. So full internal self-government would mean we are countries in the kingdom, but in sovereign association, the word sovereign at the time was the big objection, the big dirty word, because then it would mean that you are independent. And then you would actually speak of a federation of independent countries in the kingdom. That's a totally different makeup as to what we have now based on the Kingdom Charter. 4 countries in the kingdom sounds like a federation of 4 countries, but in actuality, it's a kingdom with a number of colonies, to be exact, 6, some with a more colonial relationship than the others, but in the end, you are not boss in your own country. The late colleague and good friend, Edgar Lynch, was the pusher for the electoral change at the time, and I seem to have been the only one who did not agree. We've had our private disagreements, but I didn't want to take them to the floor of the Island Council because the majority was supporting it, and sometimes I feel greatly sorry that I didn't speak out against it, because we may or may not have been, I don't know if the right word would be, saddled with what we have today, where we differ from all the countries in the kingdom. No problem with that. But what it has brought with it is a system that is kind of neither fish nor fowl, where now with the changes that we have had for 10-10-10, we have more than ever the focus on party. The party has to be structured a particular way in order to take part in the election. The party has to be registered with the Electoral Council. The party has to report to the Electoral Council their spendings, how much they have collected, whom they have collected it from, etc. The party can be penalized and held responsible for infractions by members of that party. If the party is not registered by a particular deadline, the party may not contest the elections. And so there are so many restrictions placed on the party that was never there before. I'm not saying that these are wrong. I am fully in favor of the regulations, but then the party ceases to exist the moment that one has cast their ballot, because you can't change how people have voted, even if the counting takes a week, 6 hours, or 3 days. The die is cast when people have voted. And people vote, of course, in first place for a party, but then once the votes are tallied, the party no longer exists, and we are actually dealing from that moment of taking that oath with a bundle of independent, with 15 independent members of parliament. We run to become a member of parliament, but the eyes are on the big prize most of the time, which is that of the Council of Ministers. And it seemingly now is becoming more and more habitual for the guy or the girl with the highest amount of votes as well are those who would become the ministers, regardless to their qualifications to to be the CEO of that portfolio. Now, in business, you would appoint a CEO based on his abilities, affinity, and knowledge of what he or she has to manage. But in politics now, it seems as if the CEO has to be in good graces with the people who vote for the party. And once he or she accumulates more votes than others, he or she then becomes eligible for a spot in the Council of Ministers, leaving those that had fewer votes over to become now the members of Parliament. And historically, independent members had nothing to do with issues. Independent members, well, issues, not real political issues or fallout over a particular position or policy, but it's because I didn't get, or because my friend didn't get, or because somebody was not appointed, or because somebody didn't get a piece of land or didn't get a business license, we are going to throw down the government, or we are going to pull our support from the government. And then they are rewarded. You're rewarded when you become independent member with becoming a faction. That I totally disagree with. Not that people shouldn't become independent. If you no longer want to be part of the party, your good right, become an independent member. And that's where the buck should stop. To have now, like we have, almost more faction leaders, if I'm counting right, probably more faction leaders than political, definitely more faction leaders than political parties that took place or who won seats. And that's when we get the awkward thing. 4 political parties or 5 political parties won seats, and only people on those lists can become members of Parliament. So we therefore have only 5 factions in Parliament, because 5 political parties have had seats. And then you get even the ironic thing where a political party that won seats no longer has representation in Parliament. Fine, that's how the cookie crumbles. But then instead of having 5 factions, we end up with 9 factions. Because everybody who becomes independent is rewarded with, now you're a faction leader and you're equal to a political party that has won at least 1 seat. Now, these are things that nobody else but us got to regulate for us, and not for us for this term anymore. This term is coming to an end, but I hope that members of Parliament would see the wisdom in voting for change when it comes, and that we no longer adopt a system that was there, not in writing, but by virtue of voting in Parliament, and it had become a practice by the majority, and it was continued, majority or not, that an independent member becomes a faction leader, gets all the rights and responsibilities of a faction leader, including the right to appoint 2 faction staff, and get everything that faction leaders get. Now, the historic, again, practice had been faction leaders become part of the Kingdom Affairs Committee, and at the end, at the start of the period, you have 5 factions based on 5 political parties that have seats, and midterm, you have 9 factions and a delegation of 9 factions that travel when faction leaders travel. These are not things that Mr. Julio Romney can change. These are not things that another lawyer outside of Parliament can change, or not even the Council of Ministers can change, but these are changes Parliament needs to change. And I do hope that Parliament, this Parliament, make these changes so that when the new Parliament comes in, that we are not confronted with these same things that affect the proper functioning and the proper budgeting of Parliament, because here we are preparing for a new Parliament building. We have projected for a maximum of 21 members of Parliament, but we cannot properly project if we don't make changes to this. We can end up probably with 10 factions in Parliament that grows to become 18 or 19 or 20 one of these days in the future, and that would be extremely ridiculous. I have been against, I said, of the system that says the highest vote getters become the members of Parliament. And I've said it more than a dozen times now. My good friend and brother Leo Friday, I have chosen not to argue with him about it anymore, because he strongly believes that that is the way the democracy should function. And I'm saying in a different system. And the system that we have with a focus on party, you cannot then tell someone you got to be a member of a political party, it has to be registered, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And then when you get a seat with 70 votes or with 60 votes or even with 33 votes, you can then pick up that seat. Forget the fact that the party loses the seat, but you pick up that seat and you become an equal member to the faction leader or the leader of that political party, where probably most of the votes have been cast. What it does and has done to the leaders of political parties over the years, it has made it extremely difficult for a political party to properly manage his or her party that he or she is called to lead. Because when it's just like a baseball manager, you have X amount of players to deal with, but when making your lineup, you decide, well, I'm putting this one to bat number 4 and that one to bat lead-off bat, and I'm going to have this one bat in the bottom, and this one is going to be the pinch hitter. But when maybe statistics would decide otherwise, then you have a problem when the statistics tells the manager for this game, because last game this one bat so-and-so, he or she has to be in that position. If you place as party leader someone in the 8th or 9th or 10th position, and he gets 1 vote more than somebody who was in the 2nd spot, all of a sudden your lineup that you have made turns upside down. Now, one would say complaining in Parliament, as it is made up, would be complaining hell to the devil, because it is the same members who were elected based on that system. You're asking them to change it, so don't expect that to ever happen. I hold high hopes for members of Parliament who always say we got to do the right thing. And one can argue, yes, that is democracy because I got 1 vote more than you, but then take away the party system and probably let everybody run as an independent member, and the 15 top voters then become the 15 members of Parliament, and the majority of those 15 then go and form a government. But if you are having a party system like we're having, you should not interfere with the party system by saying, Mr. Leader or Madam Leader, you were wrong, because the guy who is in the 19th position on the list, he has gotten 1 vote more than the guy who's number 7, and therefore number 7 can't become a member of parliament. That seat has to go to number 19. It disrupts the plans of the leader, and that can lead already to indigestion when that party sits around the table. Madam Chair, thank for the opportunity, and I rest my case.
Thank you, MP Marlin. I would like to adjourn for 3 minutes. Adjourn for 3 minutes.
Honorable colleagues, to the Griffier, to Honorable Mr. Julia Romney, and everybody else tuned in. We are live or not? Well, we might be live. Or maybe just the camera's not working.
No, he wasn't. It's not in that. You have to restart.
C'est la vie.
I hereby reconvene this meeting. MP Rayon Peterson, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And good afternoon to yourself, to the Griffier, to my honorable colleagues, to the Honorable Mr. Julia Romney, and to everybody else tuned in. My apologies for being late, but I had the pleasure of listening in my car as I was driving to the meeting. And, you know, Madam Chair, I hear some sentiments in regards to, you know, how a political party should have its influence on, you know, the conscience of the members of parliament. And I would have to respectfully disagree with some of the statements that I heard today, because unlike some of my colleagues, I don't believe in factions. I don't believe that because you're part of a faction in parliament means that you now owe that faction some type of loyalty. Party loyalty does not exist. And I keep saying this, and when we look at our Constitution, we see that not in one article is a political party mentioned. We, as MPs, as Parliament, have created the election ordinance in order to create a tool that actually executes what the Constitution says, which is that we have to have a system that gives St. Martin representation. Now, when it comes to the Constitution, when we look at Article 44, it's very simple. It says that the 15 of us represent the whole island. So, you know, I've heard today, you know, sentiments on whether or not an MP can declare himself independent. I am of the opinion that every single one of us in here are independent by nature because we're MPs. We are here and we are sitting here and we are supposed to vote our conscience. We're not supposed to vote. And actually, like MP Westcott said, it's not our conscience, it's voting onbezwaard. And that is something that I think a lot of MPs forget when we have to vote on motions and on laws. We tend to have the feeling that we have to vote according to our party. And you know, I do agree. It's human nature, it's human character, but the change is not going to come from Mr. Romney, and it's not even going to come from Parliament. It is going to come from the people who we elect. And, you know, I look at this Parliament now, I believe we have more people who have declared themselves independent this term than we have ever had. And I am of the opinion that this Parliament is the most dynamic that we have ever had. I look at MP Duncan, I look at MP De Weaver, and all of them have declared themselves independent, but nothing for them has changed. Maybe when it comes to faction staff or whatever, but that's irregularities that are not legislated. Those are just stuff that we do as Parliament. So, for example, we spoke about if a member declares himself or herself independent, that now they get to become a faction leader or they get to have a staff. Why don't all of us just have one staff member and that's it? Because that's also a choice. And then it wouldn't matter which party you're coming from. No, everybody has one staff member, and then they would have to do their due diligence as a legislator. But you see, when we ourselves strengthen the party system, whilst the Constitution itself is actually trying to avoid such a system, that's where we ourselves create the conundrum that we are in right now. Because we speak about putting the highest vote getters on top, but I can say that we have seen within these last couple of years, people who become the highest vote getters become ministers for ministries that they have absolutely zero expertise in. And I'm talking about this term. You know, so if we want to look in the mirror, then I think that all 15 of us should get up and look together, because one person can't reflect on it and one person can't speak from the same experience. But to say that we as MPs cannot declare ourselves independent and that the seat needs to go back to the party, it goes against everything that the law stands for. I don't think people in St. Martin realize that voorkeurstemmen is something that we throw out the window. Anybody that gets a seat outright has zero difference now compared to anybody that gets the last of the 15 seats. Why? Because it doesn't matter. There is no independent seat getter anymore because the lynch law exists. It goes by amount. The only reason that we had something called voorkeurstemmen, which meaning an outright seat, is because when you had a list and you were not number 1 or number 2, and let's say the party got 2 seats, you were maybe number 8, but you got the amount of seats, the amount of votes that gets to a seat, that means that you as number 8, although you're not next in line, you get the seat. That's the whole point of it. When we put the lynch law in place, we threw that whole system out the window. So any vote getter from these elections and the ones in the future, anyone that gets more than the amount of votes needed for a seat, that's very nice, but you're not special. You're not special because everybody that gets the highest votes under you is going to get the next seat. So let's say me, for example, I declare myself independent. And I have my party leader next to me. If, according to the sentiment, I would have to now give up my seat and let it go to the party, it would only go to the highest vote getter. So the next highest vote getter on PFP would get it, regardless if that person was number 2, number 3, or number 8. The system does not change because the lynch law is still in effect. So all you're doing is basically saying, no, the party needs to keep the seat. The party. And that is what I'm against. The political party does not exist after elections, meaning that the sentiment of following party lines, following party loyalty, the whole image that there is a captain and they have to lead you into every single decision that you take, that is something that I cannot agree with because the law tells me to be my own individual. The law tells me that as an MP, one of the 15, I need to sit here onbezwaard. And guess what? Your political party leader can be the cause of said bezwaar by law. So I want Mr. Romney's, through you, Madam Chair, his opinion on what MP Westcott said. How does this fit into other countries where MPs can also declare themselves, formally independent? And what would be the advice to us to, stop some of these issues? Because my opinion noted, I am not a proponent of ship jumping. As you can see, that has not even crossed my mind ever. But I cannot speak for other MPs. I do not know what happens behind party lines. I don't know what happens in other factions. So I cannot look at MP Duncan or MP De Wever and say, oh, well, actually, you should have just stayed. It doesn't matter what your party was doing. It doesn't matter what your captain of the team was telling you. You had to just stay because you signed a deal 4 years ago that you were going to stay with them. Therefore, you have to stay there regardless. I can't agree to that. I think Article 44 of the Constitution gives us way more responsibility than we think, and we cannot just push some of that off to the party. And that's just my little 2 cents on it. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, MP Peterson. I would go quickly to Mr. Romney so that you can answer the questions posed by MP Westcott and MP Peterson, and then I will give the floor back to MP William Marlin. MP Romney, you have the Mr. Romney, you have the floor.
There's so many things that were said, and first, I want to say clearly that I don't want anyone to get the impression that I am against a person wanting to declare themselves independent. I have no problem. I mean, if that's what you want to do, if it works for you, good. I can say what I am is an institutionalist. And if one takes a close look at our system of government, parliamentary democracy, the foundation of that system is the political party. Okay? And there's much persons that had MP Peterson talking about it's all about the individual. Once the election is finished, there's no party. That's totally incorrect. I mean, throughout the electoral order, it talks about political party. If that's the case, I mean, it cannot get any clearer when one talks about Article 47, okay? It talks about what? The system is not based on the individual. It's not based on political party. It's not based on, rather, it's based on political party. It's not based on a person. So how can one say that the seat belongs to that person? You cannot get elected on your own. It's all about the party. It's proportional representation. What it means by that what? Votes, or rather the party and the persons in Parliament takes the number of votes from the complete electorate. And by proportion, that party is represented in government. I mean, it clears again, states and in the explanatory notes. I mean, can't get any clearer. It says that in a party, and it says in other words, a party that wins 10% of the votes, hold 10% of the seats. It doesn't talk about an individual. One cannot get elected on its own. It has to go to that political party. The votes and the seats are in proportion to what? The party, not the individual. So how can that seat be yours? Okay? Here again, we're talking about, what MP Westcott talked about, voting one's conscience. You know, I don't even have words for that. Because one must understand, imagine that. We have, what, 15 persons and things, if everyone votes his or her conscience. Total chaos. That is the reason why our government is non-functioning. That is the reason why we're having issues with our complete development of St. Martin. A person believes because he has gotten X amount of votes, he's entitled to be a minister. He's entitled to be this. No, that is not the system of a parliamentary system. A parliamentary system is great because of what? It allows the ministers to be appointed. And you don't have to get elected to do that. You can appoint, and what? They would appoint professional people. Well, I go back to Ms. Westcott, and I must answer her question. No, I have not approached anyone in terms of, you know, this whole system, or rather proportional representation, or persons being able to declare themselves independent. I have not. It's my intent. I am giving these persons an opportunity to respond. Of course, at some point, I will go further. Okay, and even to the point of going to the kingdom and said, it's your responsibility for proper governance. It's your responsibility that we follow the rules and regulations. So what do you have to say about that? And person say, well, they do it in Holland. Does that make it, does that make it good? I'm not concerned about the Netherlands. I am concerned about St. Martin. I am concerned that we follow the rules and regulations. If that's the case, then what? We throw this out. We don't need then a electoral ordinance. Let us then throw the complete electoral ordinance. Let us then move probably to a presidential system where you elect yourself. You're just part of a party because of your, whether you're conservative or you're basically on your beliefs. Okay. In our system or in the parliamentary system, no, the party is the basis. And they talk about voting your conscience. I will say again, take a close look at the explanatory notes on that. This article, whatever, I don't want to call the wrong one. But what is meant there, and if you look at it, it clearly states, we understand, okay, you should not vote based on a mandate of those who elected you. But it said to understand that you are part of what? An organization. You are part of, so therefore you consult with. See? So the whole idea of you just voting your conscience, so to speak, is out the door. There's no conscience here. It's about persons getting together and working as a body for effective government. See, so and it amazes me because I said, one said, okay, there's no political party once the election's over with. No, The political parties, they threw out the election ordinance. It talks about party list. What is party list? It talks about it's a political party. Okay? The Constitution just says one thing, proportional representation. And that's all we need to go by. What does proportional representation mean? We can have our own ideas, we can have our beliefs, but that does not make it right. And I think for St. Martin to move that extra, we must go back here and follow what it says in the Constitution. What it said, not rather the Constitution, but what it says in the electoral ordinance. Okay? Party, it's a list, it's a system of what? Party. And clear as day, not individuals. In order to get, if a party wins 10%, they must have 10%. Article 95 through 96, what it says? The first things that happens is what? The party is determined how many seats the party is allotted based on the number of votes. Thereafter, each party that wins or allotted X amount of votes, then we go along and looking at the individual person on that list. So the proportionality is not based on the individual. In our one constituent election system, it's based on the party, not the individual. And until such time that we realize that, I am sorry that the development administration of St. Martin is not going to go anyplace. We just want to fight on each other. We must come to the realization that we should have persons within government, within the ministerial position, that what? That's all about having the necessary knowledge to manage those ministries. We don't have that. So therefore, where are we going to get? And the MP clearly stated earlier, we're putting persons in a position that has no clue as to what they're doing. And the parliamentary system says, okay, good. We would think because of you need, each person is free to participate in the election process. So therefore, Parliament shall be free, no discrimination. Whoever wants to, to contest can contest. But we reserve that the ministerial position, the executive branch of government must be appointed. Right? Nothing is wrong with our parliamentary system. It's the players.
Thank you, Mr. Romney. I now give the floor to MP William Marlin.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Madam Chair. And I want to thank Yeah. Thank you, Madam Chair. And thank you, Mr. Romney, for the responses you provided to questions that were raised, even though they were not necessarily raised by me, but it helps to clarify the discussion. I have missed your opening statements and therefore do not know exactly what all you have said, but I've listened to the majority, I believe. One of the things that I wouldn't want, though, to live its own life here for people who are neither in here nor particularly those that are following, when one of the MPs spoke about preferential votes, voorkeurstemmen, and he equated that to the preferential vote is once you get the amount of votes needed for a seat. That is not correct. The preferential votes was the system when if you need 1,000 votes for a seat, then if you get 501 votes, then you are elected by preferential votes, not the 1,000 votes. You get what they call the kiesdeler. Once you get half of that plus one, you get the seat. The interesting thing in this discussion, we still have quorum. We have 5 faction. The other interesting thing with this equation is if we have a system where, well, with the last election, I can't remember, Mr. Romney probably would know, and if my good buddy Rolando was here, we'd just tell him, Google that, and he would search it up, and the numbers would be here. But we had an interesting result. The leader of the Christian Party had more votes than most members who were elected to Parliament. Yet he is not in Parliament. And simply why? Not because he did not, if we had a system of preferential votes, he would have had preferential votes as well. But they would have been denied because his party did not have the quota for a seat. So in other words, if you have that for this coming election, you need 1,000 votes for a seat. And you could very well have an individual in a party, be it a party leader or not, an individual in that party that has 900 votes. But because the party total was 998, the party failed by 2 votes to get a seat. And if the party had that vote, it would have gone to him or to her. But because the party has failed, that individual who, in a system of preferential votes, would have qualified for a seat, but even in that system would not have a seat because the party first needs to get a seat. So it is a discussion that we need to have. And one of the things that I said also is things that we need to change. There are certain things that we have created in here. A faction leader, anyone who becomes independent is a faction leader. It's things that we have created in here in Parliament, I said. And there is nobody from outside, or no constitutional lawyer, or no proposal from government that can change it. It is us. Regardless of where the proposal comes from, the willingness to change these things must happen in here. And the people who need to vote on it, unfortunately and regrettably, are the same people, some of them, who have earned their seat in this fashion. Well, all of us have technically, most of us have earned our seat that way. If you came from the bottom of the list or in the middle of the list and have gotten a seat. So that I wanted to clarify. One of the things that I agree with is that we should be able to vote, let's say, your conscience. We can have an issue to vote, for instance, on same-sex marriage, and the party may think this way, the individual might think that way, and that is where you could get a clash between a party and the individual. Now, must this lead to expulsion by the party, or must this lead to the person quitting the party? That's for his or her conscience. If you say, well, because my party believes this and I don't agree, I'm quitting my party, that's the person's good right or not. But All I'm saying is we are confusing two things when the point of departure is the party, and then the focus becomes the individual. The individual can do as he wishes and he pleases, and it's not the individual that has decided that now, but the parties, some of them are allowing a system to gradually come into being where it is not about what you know, it's about how many votes you have gotten. And regardless to whether you can or cannot manage a particular ministry, it is yours simply because of the amount of votes you have gotten, and it doesn't matter how you have gotten them either. They're yours, you have gotten them, they're on your name, so you do as you wish and you would please. One of the other things one would say in defense of it, we have had ministers who did not come to a portfolio with a college degree, let's say in a particular discipline, but that person went on to be a reasonably good minister or a good minister. The other issue also that you have is we have Minister of Education, Minister of Culture, Minister of Youth, Minister of Sports. Another time you have Minister of Housing, Minister of Infrastructure, Minister of Environment, all of it into one ministry. And where should the focus be? Should one who has a strong affinity or background in housing have that portfolio? Should it be somebody who has a lot of knowledge in environmental affairs? Should it be somebody? And that is where the ministries need to be able to function properly as well, and that's where the SGs and department heads come into play. Because if you have a minister who can manage, he or she does not need to have a college education in housing or a college education in infrastructure to be able to manage a particular portfolio. Once the department heads are up to par, once the SG has his or her knowledge in place, the minister, once he or she is a good manager, they can come out on top of the game. Because the ministries are sometimes so broad. The only one that is not as broad as others is the Ministry of Finance. And that one would almost want to say, if you don't know anything about finance, stay away from it. But even then, you're going to have, we had a successful Minister of Finance in the person of Minister Richard Gibson, but by lawyer, he is a profession. By profession, he was a lawyer. So should we give him legal affairs? Should we give him the portfolio of Prime Minister, the portfolio of Justice? No, he was an excellent Minister of Finance with a background and experience as a lawyer. I thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, MP Marlin. I now give the floor to MP Peterson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, needless to say, I would have to respectfully disagree with Mr. Romney on his take on whether or not the party is the focus. And I think that, you know, I can see where he's coming from and the mistake he's making when it comes to interpreting the law. When I said the political parties are not mentioned in the Constitution, I meant exactly that. To refer that in the election ordinance, in the keys for ordering, that the political parties are mentioned, that is exactly my point. That because of the higher ranking law, the Constitution, giving Parliament the authority to make a national ordinance that sort of regulates the allocation of seats as per evenredige representation, that is where I think that the disconnect is, because I don't think that we are saying what needs to be said, which is that the keys for ordering is only applicable for elections. The momentopname that we had 4 years ago, the 9th of January 2020, that momentopname with all of the individuals, part of those for their respective parties, that is what is going to be used for the allocation of seats as per the evenredige representation. That is what's going to be used. And I'll give you an example. We have an acting MP at the moment who is part of a faction in Parliament, but that same political party has kicked him off the party. So because it's the party who got the seats, right? It's the party who got 2 of the seats. Yet at the moment, none of these 2 individuals represent that same party. You see, we have the tendency to think that because we have a party system, quote unquote, that the party has the ability or has the authority to influence anything that Parliament has to do from the moment that election stops. That is not the intention of the law. The party is supposed to take its backseat and wait until an issue comes up again that creates something that the election ordinance is now called into effect, the allocation of a seat. So another example, we have PFP. We kicked off the 3rd highest vote getter off our party. Now, if anything, God forbids, happened to my party leader or me right now, guess who gets the seat? Even though he's officially and publicly not a part of PFP anymore. But who gets the seat? He does. Because that is the scapegoat, and that is what the party system stands for, to allocate the seat when the seat is vacated. That is the only reason. It is not for loyalty. It is not to create a team. All of that is nice, but if we all have the right idea, if we all have St. Martin's best interests as the vision, then we don't need all of that. We are all voting our conscience, and it's for the best interest of the people. To think that the party is needed to hold your integrity, that is something else. Maybe parties should screen their candidates. Maybe parties should screen their candidates before allowing people that might go independent when they're elected. I know we did. So to come back, if political parties regret putting certain persons on their list, regret that certain persons got them so many votes, that probably got them to that seat as well, because those persons did have their added value to that total, then that is something different. But let's not put the political parties and their shenanigans onto Parliament. That is not the intention of the law. The intention of the law is not to hold on to your party. The intention of the law is to call the law back in effect when an MP gets suspended. Oh, then we need to check who is next. MP Brownbill is next. The USP party can say whatever they want. He is not part of USP anymore. That is fine. But when the seats got allocated, the 9th of January 2020, USP got 2 seats. So it doesn't matter if these 2 individuals declare themselves independent. If one of them gets suspended, the seat goes back to USP. That is the scope of the party, not trying to take the seat from a sitting member who was placed there as per the law at that moment, just because they have a difference of opinion with their party. Because that's called party loyalty, and that's not what's the intention of the law. So just to take that out of the question, and we would have to agree to disagree on that one, Mr. Romney. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, MP Peterson. I now give the floor to MP Heilaga Martin.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair Lady. Good afternoon to you, Mr. Romney. Thank you for your presentation. Great discussions today. And good afternoon to my fellow MPs and those listening and viewing online. Mr. Romney, through you, Madam Chair, sorry, because I'm watching Mr. Romney. Through you, Madam Chair Lady, I'd like to pose a few scenarios to Mr. Romney and get his opinion on it. Prior to 10-10-10, we were monistic. We would go in, create a slate, and here's my top 10. These are the top 10 people that will be representing you. So when they go in, that the top 5 for sure will be the commissioner and the island council member. So that's how the party sold themselves. And you know, when it comes to ideology and so on, it's either or. It's every party has an ideology, but prior to that, that's how you went in. You went in as a team, and you weren't out there looking to vote for me because vote for me, not that person, because that person will have enough votes, but I need votes to get in. So that wasn't part of that. That everyone was a team, everyone came in as a team, and when Island Council was called, that commissioners were called into Island Council, and they could have saved themselves. They were part of the voting in the Island Council as well. My question to you then, Mr. Rumley, is, through you, Madam Chair Lady, is do you think that this system now, have we had not have this system now and continue this same system as the monism and not the dualistic system that we're in right now, if we would have had less instability in government? Do you think it's worth maybe returning to a monistic system instead of a dualistic system? And in my personal opinion, through you, Madam Chair Lady, I'm an independent member, and yes, according to MP William Marlin, indeed, I agree with some of the things MP William Marlin says. Something him and I discussed many times in the past is that, yes, you have a right to go independent. It's your right. But I have two questions on this. Is it, I'm trying to understand from you, Mr. Rumley, through you, Madam Chair Lady, are you saying that if the person goes independent, it should just leave the seat and let it return the seat to the party? Is that what you're suggesting here? And secondly, right now, as it is, we're 10 factions. And we are costing this parliament a lot of money. And yes, we voted with our conscience, and because we were not comfortable or not happy with where the party was leading, some of us, 5 of us left and became independent. But I also believe that I think it's something we need to discuss and that's something I think, and faction leaders, we need to discuss and see how we should go about it. And it's mainly the cost-saving effects. In Holland, when you go independent, you're kind of like getting a tick up the finger because you're not afforded the amenities as a faction. Maybe it's something we can consider, something we should look at. Cut down on staff, cut down on travel, cut down on maybe allowing a faction leader to be, independent member to become a faction leader. These are things we need to discuss. And in conclusion, Madam Chair Lady, I'm not saying all of these because I'm actually, we've discussed these things many times and time and time again in the last 2-3 years of this term. And in the last parliamentary year, it was concluded that we prepare a term of reference. We highlighted the top articles of concerns that we want to discuss, and I've sent you a letter in January, and I sent you a letter recently, 2-3 weeks ago, asking how far we are with that, because we can start working, as MP William Allen suggested, on getting that term of reference, having real discussions, and making the changes before postulation day in November. So, Madam Chair Lady, I'm urging you to please, I'm literally begging you, because let's make this electoral council, this ad hoc committee, a workable committee between May, June, July, August, September, October, before postulation day. 6 months, we can do this. We have that term of reference out there. Let's get that law firm. Let's make valuable changes to this country for once and for all. I want to do it. And that's where I left the committee, and I would like for us as committee members to execute that. So please, and maybe with the help through you, Madam Chair Lady, Mr. Rumley, to have open discussions, but make valuable changes. Let's stop talking, and let's start walking. Let's walk what we talk and make valuable changes. Thank you, Thank you, Madam Chair Lady, Mr. Rumley. Thank you again. I look forward to your responses.
Thank you, MP Heilega Martin. I now give the floor to MP Westcott Williams.
Thank you once again, Madam Chair Lady. And Madam Chair Lady, I can be brief, and it's more of a summary. To a certain extent, and no, firstly, let me say that I agree with much of what MP William Marlin has put forward, so I'm not going to repeat all that he has stated. That's one. And the point that I wanted to make is that both Mr. Romney and MP Peterson are correct in their assumptions. And why do I say this? And having been part of the process, my recollection is very, very clear. And we have a constitution, obviously, and a constitution only establishes the basis, you know, the rights. So we needed to, according to our constitution, establish a manner, and the constitution say fair and free, establish elections to get persons to represent us proportionally. That's the constitution. However, based on our position within the Dutch kingdom, and I think it's important for this committee on the issues that we wish to not only study, but also affect change, we need to understand where these came from. And in many of the cases, what we confront today, including in our constitution, they were taken up into our constitution without any reference in terms of are they necessary, how will they apply, etc., etc. I keep saying this. And therefore, so our constitution brought, of course, you know, historically how it has come about, fair and free elections, etc., and then puts the further working out of it on the next level. In so-called, because we call these laws as developed from our constitution, we call them organic laws. We call them organic laws because the Constitution prescribes that these laws should be there. And one of them regard fair and free elections. Now we came to our electoral law. Okay, so that prescribes the procedure, etc. Many of my colleagues have gone through it. So what happened when you need to replace a member of parliament, etc., etc. But however, in the thinking, and I need you to think and understand, 10-10-10 in the Dutch kingdom, it's like, okay, but we need to update the political processes in the countries. So what do we get? We get a totally new phenomenon that was not there before within the electoral process, which is a law that regulates the registration and finances of political parties. Now, here is where the disconnect comes in with our Constitution, because that law places the political party system right in the limelight. Right in the limelight, in which political parties, and again, I don't want to repeat what I think MP Marlin brought forward, political parties are responsible for their candidates. However, once that happens, you are elected. There is nothing in our Constitution or anywhere else for that matter that states, well, within Parliament, this is the connection that a member or a faction has with the political parties. Nowhere. There's nowhere where it is regulated that if a member, for whatever reason, wishes to sever his or her ties with the party, and what's this issue of becoming independent? That's nowhere. And again, it goes back to this thing, we don't have a statement that says in our Constitution, you vote your conscience. To me, that's a different issue. And you should be, every member should be able to vote his or her conscience. How do you get there? Sometimes you get there very quickly. You look at a topic, this is the way I'm voting. But in party political systems, you would have that discussion within the party, and hopefully you can have a united front as a party. But if not, a member must be able to vote. And on the bigger the issue, the more that right has to be sanctioned in terms of voting a particular way. That doesn't mean that you don't like your party, you don't want to be with your party, whatever. You just have that position, and it's a position that you don't want to waver on. and you vote as you feel you should on those issues. But that kind of discussion on topics and on issues need to take place within party circles. So from that perspective, we have an issue where that is concerned. We have an issue where that disconnect is concerned. For me, that is clear. It has been clear. In addition to that, there's some other issues in our Constitution that, according to me, need to be rectified and even ratified. For example, and here, Madam Chair Lady, is where I believe this committee needs to pick up on the issues. Some of these things that I'm going to mention are mentioned in this proposed terms of reference that is with this committee and should be picked up. And we need to set priorities, because everybody talks electoral reform and some only look at electoral reform as changing the electoral system. So maybe going over to a district system, another vote, whatever the case may be. That's one thing. We have some issues that I believe we can deal with right now. They're not a panacea for electoral reform, but we can deal with them. So we need to mention, for example, there should be some kind of way when, for a period of time, a member of parliament cannot execute his or her function, that temporarily that person can be relieved. And again, we don't have to look far. We don't have to look far. In the Netherlands, you get maternity leave as a member of parliament, etc., etc. But we have nothing like that. We have nothing like that. And if a member of parliament falls ill or whatever, needs to recuperate, we have nothing. And these are the kind of things that we should look at and we should regulate. In addition to that, we have not worked out further. And it is stated there clearly in our Constitution that with respect to the ministerial responsibility, ministers being accountable to Parliament, not to a coalition, to the Parliament, and every member of Parliament has the right to call a minister to give account. But there's also the need to establish another national ordinance working that out. It is not done. It needs to be done. The government can dissolve Parliament. We all know that. The Constitution doesn't say another word. What, if, or how? And this too, this dissolving of Parliament, and I recommend to all of my colleagues, including the chair of this committee, research where that matter comes from in our Constitution, and we will realize that we are executing things without them being specifically for us. Without them being specifically for us, we took it over and have given it our own interpretation, and that interpretation differs from government to government. Read some of the resolutions that have been made to dissolve a parliament. Today, no parliament is dissolved in the Netherlands unless the parliament is consulted. But we haven't reached that far. We are still at a place where, it's a little secret and thing. They get upset. You call in ministers. You can't ask them no question. They get upset if you come with a motion. And they dissolve Parliament. That is not the intention of that article. It never was. But we took it over. So we need to look at these things, and we need to look at the history behind them. Look at the history and say, are these things really, really relevant? Are they valid for us? Are they adding something to our democratic system? That's what our question should be. Or are they frustrating the system? So we should ask those questions. So Article 59, Article 33, where the extra article has to come into play. And then I want to get to another point, and that is the matter of, clearly, Mr. Romney has been following the discussions in Parliament, proposals in Parliament with respect to electoral reform. So Mr. Romney referred to the issue, the proposal of the coding of the ballots. Now, our ballots are described, and they are described in a national decree containing general measures based on the electoral ordinance. But this and Mr. Romney didn't see this necessarily. No, I can't say he didn't see this. Mentioned an argument that I have heard before, and that is how do you effect something like coding the ballots and still guaranteeing the privacy that it's not traceable to whoever voted how? But on the other hand, right now, what is the control on a ballot? What is the control on a ballot to make sure that is a genuine ballot? What is the control? The control is a signature on every quarter of the ballot. So regardless to how that ballot is folded, those in the booth, so to speak, should at least make sure that the ballot that goes in has the signature. Now, if, and we know it exists, the Bulgarian train, as they call it, takes place. What does that tell us? That tells us that either the signature on a dummy ballot is falsified, or we overlook a ballot being thrown in the box without a signature. And that means that when the ballots are counted, you have ballots counted that are actually, so the counting, then something was wrong with the counting, right or wrong? Right or wrong? Because the control, and I want to repeat, the control on the ballot to make sure that I ain't pick up one that I walk with in my bag and throw it in are these signatures. And it is clear in the decree, you fold it in such a way that the signature is always visible. So you have it like in the 4 quarters of the ballot. So this would mean, and just like all of my colleagues and many persons out there, it has been verified that this has happened at different locations. And this would mean that we have then overlooked and that our controls have not been in place, right or wrong. So before we even get to what do we do now, we need to understand and acknowledge that then something was wrong, because the rather outdated, I would say, because right now you could get anybody could put a stamp on something and say this is, but then you had a falsifying of the signature one, or you had it been overlooked that one without signatures was thrown into the booth. So I just wanted to say that on this proposal for coding. So as I started out to say, Madam Chair Lady, and I want to echo the sentiments of several of my colleagues, and I think MP Grisha Heiliger Martin sort of closed off her presentation with it. We need to, I think we really need to, look at it from that broad perspective, all of the information and proposals that we have, establish some priorities and really work on them. I too agree that certain things can be changed and can be changed before a next election and should be changed before a next election. I honestly believe, of course, it will then apply to our next parliament. That's understandable. But I think this parliament now is called to do, and I believe that we can do, and we have enough resources already here in terms of proposals, in terms of researches that can be done. And I put it with you, Madam Chair Lady, as chair of this committee. If we really want to effect change, I believe that we can. So with those words, I want to thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you, MP Westcott Williams. I give the floor now to MP Duncan.
Thank you, Madam Chair Lady. Good afternoon to you. Good afternoon to Mr. Romney. And good afternoon to my colleagues and all those tuned in. Madam Chair, I also have to disagree with Mr. Romney's stance, for the record. I think, especially on St. Martin, we seem to forget that systems, that frameworks, that structures are made up of people, human beings with personalities. And although you cannot legislate character and integrity and honesty, we need to look deeper than just what has been happening on the outside as it concerns, in particular, members going independent. Mr. Romney said, Madam Chair Lady, that he did not look at the other countries in the kingdom. He didn't ask about independent members there. But currently, we do have 2 independent members in the Tweede Kamer. We have 1 independent member that just went independent in Aruba, with another young MP maybe declaring herself independent soon. And this member of parliament in Aruba, a former professor of constitutional law, said, and I quote, "The seat belongs to the people and not the party." But again, it is a matter of difference of opinion. Fine. We all can have differences of opinion. This is not a St. Martin phenomenon, okay? And as it concerns stability, then yes, we have to evaluate not from a place of punishment and emotion, but from a place of really looking at the structure and evaluating what works for us in our culture. And again, deeper than just what is surface level. Madam Chair, when we look at, because according to Mr. Romney, it is all about the party, the election ordinance, this is how we get into parliament, the party is the core focus. Okay, well, how are parties set up on St. Martin, especially as it concerns their manifestos, their values, their beliefs? Because I can tell you, oftentimes, parties have manifestos in which their content, not all, but some, their content is quite scarce. So as a member, and I'm talking about as a constituent, but also even as a candidate, you come in not really knowing what the party's stance is on certain issues. Is the party left-leaning on immigration, or are they right-leaning? And then you get elected, and persons are put in ministerial positions, and you find out, oh, wow, is this the party's stance, or is the individual minister choosing to make decisions on their own personal views? So as a candidate, how do you go against what is a person in a position of power? Or is it the party's stance, or what is it really? And that's the thing. That's why I ask us to look deeper than just, oh gosh, we have to punish this person because they disagreed with the party. But what does the party actually stand for? And do the candidates themselves know what the parties stand for? Not only do candidates find themselves in shock, but constituents find themselves in shock. Why? Because parties are not properly and effectively establishing their policy views on matters of importance. And that, to me, I find is more important than whether a member thinks that they should leave the party. When it comes to staffing and cost, MP Peterson made a proposal. In Aruba, we were talking to some Aruban MPs recently. Parties have to establish foundations, and those foundations are given budgets to then use. Whatever direction we go in, we need to, again, look at what works for us as St. Martin, and we need to say what will be the best way possible. Not only the most cost-effective way, but it also has to be accountable. Because parties can have, whether it's 1 staff or 3 staff members, is the work being done to serve the country? To me, that is what it's about. When we talk about staffing again, it's interesting because about 10 years ago, ministers' cabinets were about 5 persons on average. Now we see huge cabinets, maybe because there are a need, or there is a need for more persons. But then ministers are now justifying that need. So even the cost of cabinets have increased. And what you see now is a number of consultants being hired. So they might not be directly working in a cabinet, but they're consulting the minister. We have to evaluate all the structures in the public sector on St. Martin, Madam Chair. It is not only about evaluating Parliament. So I look forward to those evaluations as well. When we look at the Constitution, Madam Chair, again, what do we think, or what are the standards that we want to set for ourselves? Because in Nigeria, the Constitution says that an elected official should at least, minimum, have a high school diploma. Is that something that we could agree to here? Should we also adapt our Constitution, maybe? Because in here, we've talked about the standards that we want, and we've talked about persons being put on lists, being elected, and not being able to either handle the job, or, you know, sometimes getting elected when you might have think they shouldn't be. But then again, you know, they've met the minimum requirements set in our Constitution. Should we add more minimum requirements to our Constitution if we are so concerned about the quality of governance in this country? In the United States, in order to become president, you have to be at least 35 years of age. A 21-year-old cannot, sorry? No, yeah, 35 years of age, I just checked it. A 21-year-old cannot become president in the United States. Does this make sense to us? In theory, to me, yes. So again, Madam Chair, I would like us to not only hold ourselves accountable as citizens, as members of parliament, as ministers, I think we need to hold parties accountable as well for how they are managed and how they run. And I do agree that not only do we have to really evaluate how our electoral system has managed to take us as a country, but we have to also dissect how government is run, the structures, the frameworks, all of these, yes, indeed, from our colonial history and past, and then make recommendations that are not based in emotion, but are based on culture, logic, and who we are as a people, our beliefs, our values. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, MP Duncan. I now give the floor to MP William Marlin.
My final contribution, I hope, for this afternoon. I agree with some of the MPs that say, or one of the MPs that said that we need to conclude this. We have been talking for the last 13 years, 12 years, 13 years, 15 years on electoral change and how we would want our Constitution to be. And at the time, I can remember when we were trying to deviate from the kingdom constitutions. We were told, don't rock the boat. Make sure you keep it in line with the kingdom. And once you become country, if you want to make certain changes, do it then. I think if we wanted to make changes, we should have done it then, because now it might be even more difficult to get certain changes through. But it must be realized that we are different countries in terms of different people. How our thinking and feelings are should dictate how we structure certain things that we need to manage us and not structure them based on another man's culture and then expect our people to behave like how their people would behave. It would be a great pity because we use always as the main excuse whenever we don't get certain things done is because, yeah, you know, government fall, we had 12 governments within so much time, so we had 8 governments within 5 years or 6 governments within 2 years or 3 years, you know, this kind of thing. Now we've had a stable government for 3 years. We're in the 4th year now, but changes that need to take place did not take place, and probably because we didn't have enough stability within Parliament, a Parliament that would agree, let's tackle this, that, or the other. But if we can all agree to make sure, bring about at least those things that we can change for the next parliamentary sitting, it would be great. One of the things that can maybe help solve one of the problems that we have is what MP Peterson basically brought forward is one man, to paraphrase, one man, one staff. So right now, we have, I believe, more staff serving the 15 MPs than the 15 MPs. And if we don't have more in person, we definitely have more on paper in terms of the ability to appoint. Because, yes, if you start with 10 factions, and each faction has a minimum of 2 people, you already have 20 people there. And there are factions, like the National Alliance faction, that definitely has more than 2 people. So we probably now somewhere maybe around 24, 25 to sort of 15, while if we keep it for every elected member, you have 15, you have 1 person. And if you started off with 7 seats and you end up with 4 or 5, your representation would diminish for every man that you loses. So if you start with 7 and you end up with 3, you lose 3 members, 3 staff members, but in exchange for the 3 that have left, you're not gaining 3 extras, you're replacing them with 3. So I can agree with that for starters, to get a discussion going. Not only a discussion, but that would lead to decisions. And one of the things I believe that we agree on is that there is a fundamental difference with the approach of the role that parties need to play, or the role that parties should or could play, of is there any role at all other than what is assigned right now to them. But it is clear that what we have right now is not functioning optimally. And I would hope that in this remaining period, this committee for sure would meet regularly, because there is work to be done. There is enough information out there. All we now need to do is seriously come together and work towards establishing decisions, taking the necessary decisions. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, MP William Marlin. I see MP Westcott Williams has or needs the floor. You have the floor, MP.
Thank you once again, Madam Chair Lady, and even briefer than before. The colleague Duncan made a reference to, for example, Nigeria, where it pertains to a certain level required for persons to serve. And in addition to that, this matter of voting your conscience and going with the seat or not, seat of party or not, and as again another colleague stated before, this is something that is considered sacred within the Dutch kingdom, but it's not a universal thing. We have, for example, India, in which it states in their very constitution that if you leave, the seat remains with the party, clearly. So it's not a universal thing. It is something that within the kingdom has become customary. We have adopted it and we have executed it. In addition to that, and MP Marlin stated it as well, when it comes to certain changes, we have to be well prepared to argue the differences when we want certain changes to be made, including to our constitution. Because remember, the issue of ship jumping, several governments and prime ministers, including MP William Marlin, have tried to change the constitution to make that less possible. And it was rejected not only by the kingdom government because of this right of the individual member of parliament, but also by our council of advice, for example, because everyone is holding on to that rock of, you know, it's the individual. But again, we have also, in the context of, if you wish to call it modernizing, we have also gone further where the political party is concerned. And so that distance has become even more between constitution and between the system of political parties. In addition to that, the reference regarding factions and whatever have you, realize that the only place this is regulated as such is within our rules of order. One, in fact, our rules of order go out from the premise that factions will get financial contributions to run their factions. That's right now today. That's within our rules of order, but that's not the way it happens because it couldn't be applied in practice. So, again, we took over these things without looking at the real situation, without looking at, whether they could work or not for us. And I think that needs to happen post-haste. And again, there's so much that we can talk about, we can discuss. There's so much that I'm sure we will agree on that needs to be changed very quickly. And that's why priorities are important to be established. Thank you, Madam Chair Lady. And I want to thank Mr. Romney because your presentation today has allowed the kind of discussion and debate that you have heard, that you have heard and that we have been able to carry on. So for that, I want to thank you for your presentation and look forward to having further discussions with you as we kind of zoom in on some of the things that could possibly lead to some changes. Thank you, Madam Chair Lady.
Thank you, MP Westcott Williams. Mr. Romney, I now give the floor to you for your closing remarks.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, quite has been said here, and I wish and I'm hoping that I would have gotten the opportunity to answer some of these questions that many of the persons spoke about.
You can.
And I guess I can't remember all those questions that a person had. So I think I would have preferred, or rather another format we could engage in a debate than would have been, to me, would have been much more fruitful. But I want to, with that said, I want to answer briefly MP Halliger Martin's question. And when she talked about the system that we had before 10-10-10. And I would said, at that time we had a commission plan government. Today we have a full-fledged parliament and, or rather, a full-fledged constituent state. And no, I don't think a commission plan government, that type of government can work, or would be what would be needed for St. Martin as a constituent state of the kingdom. So I don't think that will work. Because there are a number of different things I wish I had an opportunity to respond to, and I can't remember all of the questions. But the main thing, what was said here, most have said, well, Mr. Romney, we disagree with you. And I could understand that. And I would say that the disagreement here, that our constitutional, or the framers of the Constitution, realized that that might have been the case and has made provisions for that. Clearly stated in the electoral ordinance. It talks about our system. A system is not a system of persons. It's a system of parties, a system of lists. Whatever we might feel, I understand a person, you get elected, or rather, you get selected, and you want to be that. I understand that. And you're entitled to that, your opinion. But your opinion do not make it a fact. I dare question, I mean, it's crystal clear there. If we don't want to be in that system, good, let us change it. But don't say, well, I don't agree. That's your own subjective opinion. It's clear. It could not be any more clear in this thing. It says a party that wins 10%, gain 10%. You're saying to us now that, good, we should not believe our lying eyes. No problem. You want to change it, we can change it. See? But clearly, when one talks about the Constitution doesn't say that, the Constitution doesn't say that, the Constitution said all that it needs to say. Constitution said, Parliament shall be what? Elected by proportional representation. What does proportional representation mean? It goes on to first say that the seats are basically in proportion to the number of votes that the party receives. Okay? And there were a number of different things that I can't remember all the questions. I wish that I had an opportunity to respond to some of these questions, you know, while they were asking. And I go back again, and I keep on saying it, go to Article 47, okay? Go to the explanatory notes, okay? It's clear, it's crystal clear. Our constitutional, the framers of Constitution realized that this would have been the case, and they have made it crystal clear for us. So there's no question. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Romney. I believe that there were no questions posed by the members of Parliament. I believe MP Marlin, MP Westcott Williams, and MP Duncan actually were giving their opinions on the matters, and you answered the questions posed by MP Peterson and MP Heiliger Martin. So I believe that we have come to the end of this meeting. I want to thank you once again, Mr. Romney, for your presentation. I also want to indeed acknowledge what was brought forward by all of the various members of Parliament, in particular concerning us meeting and working on all of the documents that have been received thus far. So I will say here on the floor of Parliament that hopefully, if it is possible, I will check with the President of Parliament to see if we can schedule in our next meeting week a meeting to deal with these issues. I thank everyone for tuning in today. I thank our guests and I thank our members of Parliament for having a lively discussion today. I hereby close this meeting. Meeting closed.